Welcome, Genesis Nation, and we got an action-packed, brain-filled session today. And our job here is to help you leverage technology to create your dream practice. I am honored and humbled to be with my friend and coworker, former coworker, now current coworker, Mr. Jason Barnes is the Chief Operating Officer of Genesis Chiropractic Software. And if you don't have a pen and paper or something to write with, this one will be a brain-filled session to really focus on your business. Today's topic is organizational power, and this man here, if those of you in Genesis Nation have not met him, he is organizationally powerful and powerfully organized and very humble. So to get us started, Jason, we're just going to get right to it here. So
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, three things.
So hold on 1 second before we get at it. Should you recommend the Adderall now? I mean, because you once told me you needed it in order to listen to me.
No, because I've matured a little bit.
Okay, very well.
But for those of you who do have that diagnosis and need it or need to get adjusted or do whatever they do, but put your attention hat on, focus on this. I'll stop with the funny stuff if you are laughing, hopefully. At least you and I will laugh at each other. But truthfully, we just want to give you some really good information on how to run your organization. This will apply not just to your chiropractic practice, but business in general. So let's start out with, so what are the three things that an organization needs to succeed?
Now, when you first start your organization, it's usually just you, right? And it still applies if you're a person of, one, regardless of whether or not you're going to bring in other people or not. But you need people, process, and technology in this day and age in order to succeed. So without those three things working in concert, and at least your awareness of how those three things are going to work together, you're not really set up for success, Brian.
So people, process, technology.
You got it.
All right, great. So let's dive into people part. People part first.
The toughest part first, huh?
Yeah. Why not? Because I've definitely, like, in my career, I have left a trail of crying employees, like just a wake of destruction. And I learned from you even back in the day when I was running a brick and mortar business, how to deal with people more efficiently. So please lay it on me.
So when you're running that out, the first thing that you want to do is include them in anything that you're doing. You think that you've got a corner or on the market of good ideas, and you simply don't. And so the other part about people, before I get into how you're going to organize them, is you think you might be good at selecting the right people. The thing we found out after a long period of time is that that's something we brought in a third-party partner to do is been extraordinarily beneficial, because it turns out, Brian, we're not an amazing, judge of character. But to start with, you have to map out what your client experience is supposed to look like. You have to be able to say, from start to finish, when somebody first hears of my business to when they're getting their service, all the way to they're done getting the service, what does that experience look like? What is it supposed to look like? What does it look like now? What's the difference between the two, right? Because if you map out that client experience, you have people, process, and technology that you want to, apply to all of those. You have to put in where the people are going to get involved, what the process is going to be, maybe what technology they're going to use. But then you have to find the people who are supposed to do the things in the people part. And without that client experience completely mapped out, first, what you want it to look like, what service delivery actually means to you in an ideal, scenario, you don't even have the first ability, because you think you know what you want somebody to do. And Brian, this has happened. I'll give you a couple of anecdotes, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
Where we want to hire a social media manager. We think it's a good idea. We know we need to have more of a social media post. This is a recent one. This isn't one from when we first started. And you think to yourself, well, let's get that done. But we've given ourselves some strict rules before we hire anyone. We look out, what's that client experience supposed to look like? How do they fit into it? And then as we start mapping out what that looks like, then all of a sudden, we don't need a social media manager. We need a content creator. Posting, it's the easy spot. We can We can get a program out there to automatically post this stuff. We're
Yeah.
missing content. And I think sometimes we aim, we fire in the wrong order. And
Right.
so
your aim, fire, or fire, ready, aim instead of ready, aim, fire. That's one that I apply to my own life all the time.
right. But now it's 6 months down the road and you're upset with a social media manager who was brought on to manage things that you didn't fully understand. You thought you set expectations in the beginning, but you didn't fully map out what the position was supposed to require, what you actually needed, how the client was supposed to benefit from it, who you wanted the exposure from. So, and that's just one aspect of it. When you want to deliver excellent service and you want it to be consistent, there's a profile that goes along with that person that exists out there.
Yeah.
And that profile is really specific. And you don't want anybody who's shoehorned into that profile, because they'll only be successful for a brief period of time. If they are faking it, it's going to require energy. It's going to create struggle and friction because it's not where they truly belong, right? I want somebody to be excited about their job. Went to a mechanic shop once and I was so excited because the guy's like, well, you've got an interesting piece of machinery here. You know, I like to build Jeeps and I like to go off-roading. And in this particular situation, I needed some help with something. And I'm starting to talk to this mechanic and he's more excited about Jeeps than I am. And I started getting really excited to work with him.
Yeah.
The bill came, I didn't think about that because I just was excited to talk to him about what we're going to do and how we could be creative together. He had passion for what he was doing.
Which, and it's that, you know, it comes down to a couple things like that right person on the right bus. But, you know, as I'm kind of peeling apart our conversation here, what I dive into first is really self-awareness, right? Because you as a leader in this role, you've had to take the time to create awareness around yourself first, put your ego out of the way, because maybe in the past you're like, no, I can read people, I get them, I understand. Like I went through an entire personality profile, even though you guys you've known me for 12 years or even longer. So
Longer,
so that's a critical aspect to people. So we're saying, one, I'm throwing this piece in, but just kind of peeling out from what you said, you know, knowing yourself, having self-awareness, putting your ego aside, and that other people have just as good of ideas as you may have.
So in that context though, Brian, you know, as you're putting a very clear process in place, right, for this person to follow, and they're the right person for the job, they're going to actually be in a position to be more creative, to take ownership, because it's what they're meant to do. It's how they're meant to exist. They're serving the people that they were born to serve. And we have to stop trying to fit so many round pegs into square holes, but that requires clarity on the part of the business owner or the stakeholder in the business. Yes. If you don't have exact clarity as to what is supposed to be done, how do you expect the person who's doing it to actually get the job done? And this is a mistake that's made in a lot of different places. I mean, one of the biggest examples is Steve Jobs. He got fired from his own company, an Apple, right?
Yeah.
Because of that lack of clarity. He's competing with two different business models to create two different things, and it dragged the business down. Apple almost went out.
Yeah.
You think your business can't? It absolutely can. Well, then you find a unicorn, right? You find there's this biller in Massachusetts once that I met. Her name was Karen, and there just wasn't anything you couldn't do. And I thought to myself, wow, I wish I could get a whole stable of her, but she's a unicorn, right? She's a 1 in a million find. That's not going to happen again to you. The likelihood of you finding all those unicorns, hiring them, is something that you should kind of get out of your mind. You're going to have to create a team. And creating a team comes from a leader who understands what the service is supposed to look like and then knows how to develop people. And there's 3 really cool ways that you have to develop a person. Brian, you mind if I get into those right now, or do you have another comment?
I would love to. But there is a burning question. It's like, how have you wrangled so many unicorns? But maybe that's part of this process, because you maybe didn't wrangle them. You helped bring out the unicorn within the people that you found.
So I use the word unicorn because about eight or 9 years ago, we kept hiring people, and guess what? It wasn't working because we lacked clarity. And we thought that people could do multiple jobs, right? They could be a salesperson, they could be a service delivery person, they could go to events, set up a booth, and actually market our services. And we had a few of those, Brian, and it was fantastic. But then we tried hiring more of them, and they couldn't do that, and they were miserable, and they made us miserable, and we made them miserable, and it was something, you know, that just spiraled out of control. And it was my fault. It wasn't their fault, it was mine. And as soon as I took responsibility for that and looked for why it kept happening, that's when the light bulb went off and we figured out how to do it differently. So the steps we took was we sought to really describe, and when you sit down, you actually try and write down the process that you're trying to, you know, achieve, the goals you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
It provides clarity for you because you realize how many gaps you have in that.
And again, that's going through that entire experience from like finding you from whatever your service is. You know, obviously we're in chiropractic, but you know, from finding you to delivering the service to creating referrals.
So I'm going to get there because that's a big one. But you want to find a group of people who are going to row in the same direction as hard as you. Get that out of your mind. That doesn't exist either. You can create them, but you're not going to find them, right? So as soon as you understand that you're going to have to bring
that was my no way face, but sorry.
Fair enough. But every now and then, right, you walk around, you can find a gold nugget, right? But most of the time you have to dig into the earth to find the gold, right? There's a lot of effort that goes into extracting the gold out of the earth, the precious metal, right? You don't find it just lying there on the ground, right? So because you're going to have to do some digging, you're going to have to put some effort in, you have to understand that people have to develop mastery. Unless somebody feels like they're getting better at something, you're absolutely not going to keep them long term. Most people aren't going to sit there in one position without some sort of growth pattern. So you have to find their strengths and make sure that they're going to be able to use them and perfect them. Mastery. Then you have to give them, I'm sorry?
Mastery.
They have to have some level of mastery. And they can start really small. You can find somebody with lots of potential, but make sure you find out what that strength is and give them an opportunity to lean into that. Awesome. But then you got to give them some sort of autonomy. You can't lean on them on everything. They have to go through some trial and error. There has to be some failure. And once you agree on what the goals are and what the KPIs are, then it's an iterative process to build them, right? It's when you that autonomy.
Iterative is like a college word. Can you break that down into like a second grade word for me?
Sure. Iterative means that it's going to be something that repeats over and over and over again. You're going to have to come up with a way to leverage time, right? Where that person runs the meeting, right? The person that you're meeting with comes, they reports back on what they were doing, what worked, what didn't work. And you're going to guide them and create that decision-making matrix that allows them to make their own choices based on feedback, right? And accountability. But you have to give them the autonomy to build it themselves. How many business owners, Brian, have you talked to who have complained that their associates or their employees don't own the problem?
Yeah, and then, but I'm like, where I'm thinking is like, how much is enough rope to hang yourself? And like, is it a scaled process where like in the beginning you're checking in way more often? You know, because obviously, like on the road to mastery, you're also providing a pathway of autonomy for these people to grow. But how much is too much? How much is not enough?
You map out the process that you want there to be, right? They can't just come in and have there be a blank slate, right? And say, you go figure it out. So you have more than just a rough understanding of what the client experience is supposed to, you know, to look like. You bring them in, you profile them, and you make sure that they fit the profile for the type of parts where you plan on plugging them into the people parts of your business, right? Then when you find out what those strengths are, you agree on those strengths, and you say, I'm going to give you this amount of autonomy. You agree on it together. If you're dictating something, you're transferring ownership from them to yourself, and you're holding on to it.
Jason, this sounds this sounds a little bit like parenting.
Tell me the difference between negotiating with a customer and a 3-year-old eat broccoli. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's the same.
So, and I
Even the late night DJ voice works for my teenagers.
It works for everybody,
Yeah,
right? You know, you label that problem and
physiology. It's yeah.
well, none of us really want to change, right? The only time we're ever really going to do it is if we want something more than the pain of staying the same. So we have to get into the mode that if we're a driver and we're somebody who's looking to make something better, and I don't want to be there to manage every second of it, then I have to be able to go through the pain of watching some failure happen in a place where I could do it better. That part stinks, but you have to sign up for that part, Brian. You simply can't.
That's like the endurance of a business owner. It's like it's not just like the entrepreneur is like, oh yeah, I'll just start this and then get out of here. But the business owner has to focus on developing employees, developing systems. We're going to get into process in a second, but there's one more piece to developing your unicorns or this unicorn process.
You can build unicorns, you really can, but they have to want the same things you want in life. We run a company to serve chiropractors. We run a company that's specifically geared to freeing the finite number of chiropractic businesses that exist in America right now so that they can go serve more people in their communities. Meaning that if they're using our service, our product, our methodology, they'll create more time and freedom so that they can keep people off of pills, keep people from getting unnecessary surgeries so that they can go out and serve their communities better. Because I don't know how to create more chiropractors, Brian, but I do know how to create more time for businesses.
And efficient. Yeah.
There's huge efficiencies that can be leveraged if you're using a system like ours and an approach like ours. But if you bring people on who don't care about that, they're not going to do it like you. They're not going to reach the potential of that experience that you're mapping out because they simply won't care. So we have the added benefit of having to find people with purpose. And if we find people with purpose, if we find people that are looking to change minds and hearts so that chiropractic and a non-allopathic approach to healthcare starts to take over America, I then don't have to push them. They push themselves. And so if they're getting good at something, if they've got a lot of autonomy, but again, no lack of accountability, right? It's not, we're not hands off, right? And we're going to pour into them, right? And their purpose matches mine. I now have the right people.
Awesome.
It's a formula for putting people in place.
I'm going to call it the unicorn highway, and I've already thought of about a t-shirt.
Well, I used the word unicorn about 8-9 years ago, and I called my current team a bunch of unicorns.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it backfired on me, but they all changed their avatars to unicorns. I had unicorn stuffed animals sent to me. I had a unicorn coloring book sent to me called Unicorns Are Jerks. My kids colored it at church. It was
my t-shirt idea is a picture of a unicorn on the back or the front, and it says "Blame Jason." So I'll work on that. But let's keep us focused, because I did take my no, just kidding. Did not take Adderall. Process. So we talked about people. Let's just summarize that real quick. So with people, in the overarching theme, we're talking about people, process, technology, and developing people is about helping them find their mastery, creating autonomy, and then making sure their purpose is aligned. Now, as we shift into process, can you tell me a little bit more about process and scalability, measurability?
So I think there's a fallacy that exists out there that there has to be a process for everything. And the reason I say that right to start with is I'm for processes and I'm for mapping out your biggest ones, but you're never going to create a process for everything, right? It's impossible, right? There's not a handbook that says how you're going to handle every single situation, but you can create a culture based off of core values that are really applicable in any given situation. So keep in mind that you want to create those values more for the processes than for the people. And the reason I say that, Brian, is I can't tell you be excellent, but I can show you in this situation where you're actually delivering the service, you're interacting with your employees, you're interacting with the clients, you then can demonstrate that value. If you don't demonstrate it in the process, they won't be able to apply it across the board to all of the things that aren't exactly labeled.
So
you'll spend a lot of the time.
In the context, you're saying excellence, which is one of our core values at Genesis. But so in that context, you're saying you have to show your people what excellence looks like.
It has to be, because,
And also, are you pointing out those occurrences of excellence to your people?
that's a big part of it, but keep in mind, you have to keep talking about it, and you have to use the actual terms, when you're talking about your processes that are written down. What does excellence look like here? And make them tell you, what does excellence look like here for the things that are written down? Then you have to say, how do we apply that to the things that aren't written down? What are some things that happened to you in the last week that you don't have a process for? How did you handle those?
I'm gonna pause this just for a second, because I want to give us just a quick example. So let's
Sure.
make this like applicable. Let's just say it's the first visit, new patient visit.
Mhm.
You would then talk to an office and say, what does excellence look like here? Or, in training if excellence is one of your core values, obviously it's one of ours.
Right.
So what does excellence look like for this new patient arrival?
You got it.
Awesome.
Well, and think about that, Brian. I've been to more coaching seminars for practices than I care to count.
Yeah.
And they typically have really good processes for your day one, your day two. What they don't have is when somebody comes up with a brand new objection, or you're on the phone with somebody for a no-show and you sense that there's an issue that you don't know about. Now, you can train on certain things all day long, but there is no exact script for every single situation.
Right.
And serving chiropractors, there's no exact script for all the things that can happen, right? But I want to pay my people this way, or I want to get my numbers a little differently than what Genesis has in their system. And our team is put into a position of, it falls outside of our process, but what does excellence look like here? If you have them asking that question, you don't have to develop a process for everything, because you can go overboard. If you have a process for everything and you think you're going to get a process for everything,
it's like death by meeting, death by process. But what I'm really, the gem that I'm pulling out here is that your processes are predicated on the core values. So that's like critical, because
you got it.
These can fail. People can fail within the processes, but they can be adaptable if we're all agreeing on the same core values.
Well, remember, you hired people, Brian, because you couldn't do all the jobs. You couldn't scale the business. If you had to do all the jobs, it would hit a glass ceiling and you never, ever break through it, right? You'd have to be there 100% of the time. You have people because there are strengths that you don't possess that other people do, right? And you have to let them excel in their areas. But you also don't have the ability to write down and map out everything. Even if you did, it's unreasonable to think that with the spectrum of things that can happen, that somebody's going to be able to recognize that situation, map it out to the right process, and then execute it. So for us, for the big things, you want to map out what that client experience looks like and make sure you have a repeatable and transferable process in place. And I can give you some examples of those.
Please. Yeah.
You bring a new patient on, you bring a new client in, right? For them to have an excellent experience, you're going to have it mapped out. You're going to have what the first call is supposed to look like, and you're going to set expectations beforehand. You're going to tell them at the beginning of the call, you're going to execute the call, and then you're going to check to make sure it met the expectations that you set before the call at the beginning of the call, so that everyone's on the same page, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know how to change something if the client gives you feedback that their experience isn't excellent, right? You have to be able to repeat it and go through checklists to make sure that that process is actually done the way that you're supposed to. Read a book called The Checklist Manifesto and learned that many of our airline accidents could have been avoided if the checklists were followed. When I mean many, 88% was the stat that they selected there. And I thought to myself, well, if we're talking about the clients or the patients that go off the rails, is it because we missed a spot in our checklist? So repeatable means that you can actually measure the parts that are happening and the ones that are not happening. You have to be able to go back and actually look and measure whether or not that's happening.
This
Train.
my brain is exploding, and we can go really deep into this. I think we should save it for another one. But I'm really curious about like how to measure for the things that are happening, and even more so how to measure for the things that are not happening.
Well, the thing that blew my mind is when
in human experience, and checklist, yes, but like what happens? It's hard for me not to think about like, okay, there's empathy involved in there, like when you have a human experience, and we're in chiropractic, right? So that, and then just go ahead, because I'm
no, your mind's racing, and I get it. But when we sat down with the franchise group and we looked at what their offices were doing, we actually sat down and started mapping out. And Dr. Brian Capra, one of the founders of Genesis, sat down and made a list, and my mind was blown at how many steps go into getting a new patient, through the door. It's hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds of little things. Their experience isn't just a handshake, an x-ray, and some words at a report of findings. There's lots of little things that go into it. And measuring it seemed impossible, but we figured out a way. We figured out a way of putting checklists in place that allow somebody to measure whether or not they're applying their process to the new patient, in the fact that we can pretty much point out which spots were missed, right? As you're
like,
going
I mean,
through.
there could be a space where like the CA is supposed to deliver them from the front desk back to the exam room, and
There you go.
to follow a script. If that script isn't followed, or they take them the wrong way,
Right.
there's your variable right there. What did or did not happen?
And let's apply that to your own business for just 1 second internally, right? You're going to bring on an employee. Typically, when you're talking to them, you use the term hands-on training. You want to translate that one for me, Brian?
Go embody it. You're going through it. Like,
yeah,
I
don't plan on teaching you. I plan on just showing you, and I'm hoping that you get it.
Go.
Right? Now, hands-on training.
Then they come back a month later like, I haven't been trained. I don't know anything.
And they're not lying. They're right.
Right.
Right? Because nobody slowed down to make sure that they were taken into consideration. And I'm sharing this because I went through the pain of using a term like hands-on training when I hired people. What a ridiculous statement to use, right? So we had to have a repeatable process for bringing new team members on board. And we went from having a 50% attrition rate with employees to about a 90, 95, 96% retention rate. And all the difference was simple. It was simple. And it was even faster. We started bringing people on board with, being ready to go, serving our clients within 2 to 3 months, as opposed to 4 to 6 months. So we almost doubled our efficiency time when we came up with this. So when we mean that it's repeatable, because it's written down.
Yes.
If you don't take away written down from this, you've missed it. This thing has to be in black and white. You have to be able to see it. If you can't show it to somebody else and use one of the 3, sometimes referred to as 4 ways that people will actually learn, right? They either learn kinesthetically, they learn auditorily, or they learn visually. You want to make sure you give them the opportunity to learn all 3 ways.
And there's so much technology to be able to provide that now from I know there's software out there that actually has training manuals, but you have Loom, you have Microsoft, or excuse me, Google. Sorry, blasphemy.
It's not blasphemy.
Let's move on. So within process, we've got repeatability, transferability, which we just talked about. How about scalability?
So this goes back to, do you have to do it? Right? Meaning, are you the one that has to give the training? Like, if your organization is going to keep growing, are you able to have other people do this? Right? Without your input, can somebody else do it? Do you have tools in place that allow you to train somebody and you walk away? Without that, you are now setting your business to whatever limitation you possess. And that's going to limit your free time, your vacations. Oh, you're sick? I don't care. You have a new person starting today, right? So it's the scalability portion.
You're having a baby. Too bad. You got to go in.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does that really mean? When you're developing these processes, right? you also have to measure how much time they take, right? Because when you have 10 clients and you have no other time, it's okay to spend, I actually count how many hours our team spends with a new client in each segment of their life with us. I have it mapped out what it's supposed to be. I have them track how many hours they actually spend with their clients. And if we're above or below with a certain margin of error, no big deal. But if we're above or below with larger margins of error, I know that if our sales team starts going from 34 clients a month to 68 clients a month, I can't keep up. So I need to know if I can actually scale the business linearly with employees, or whether or not I can leverage more technology or better resources to make sure that that client comes on board, because it's not a linear growth pattern typically, right? Your expenses tend to go higher as you get more clients. So if you think it's okay spending 14 hours, doing something, I'm arbitrarily choosing 14 right now, right? With 10 clients, because that's all you have is 10 clients, and you have the time available, you didn't think through your process because your whole goal was to get to 200 clients.
Right.
500 clients.
Yeah. That was the, early on in chiropractic practice, for those of us in Genesis Nation that are in practice, like,
right.
I would go on the floor from day one and act as if I was seeing 300 people a week, and leave the floor so that I'm not treating someone for 30 minutes to an hour. That's
it takes discipline, right?
Yeah.
It takes discipline to do that. And just one other point about scalability, it's something that has to be measured, which is our next point. So this really is a segue into it, because if you can't measure what the client experience looks like, there's no way you can scale it. So the last one, under process has to be measurable, which ultimately means that you have to be able to measure what that team or that individual is supposed to be producing, right? Now, I'd like to make two distinctions here, one between quality and one between production, right? You can make something with a super high quality, which might slow down production, right? Or you can make something with a super low quality, which might speed up production. Obviously, there's a sweet spot that needs to be found there, and that's going to be different for every single business, but you're measurable for each department or person is typically geared towards production, right? But you simply can't forget the quality aspect of it. How do you measure quality? Whether or not it's a net promoter score, whether or not it's the number of referrals you're getting, there's got to be a way to do both. But that net promoter score or churn or however else you're going to measure it for your business is something you have to do overall, as well as come up with a production measurement number for each department or person.
Well, what's relevant within, from the chiropractic practice, when I'm, because everyone's always worried about new patients, right? We're always concerned. How many new patients a busload of 100 unqualified patients who are, that's not as good as, just a Volkswagen full of qualified patients who are going to stay, pay, and refer, right? So there is I see that teeter between production and quality.
So my favorite story here is I visited over 200 practices, and I told you I've been to more conferences than I can probably count, right? Yeah. And they get up there, and I've seen them clap for the people that average 50 new patients a month for a year, right? And I've seen the small, very not so inconspicuous smiles on the faces of the practice owners who only get 10 new patients a month, but retain 90% of them, right?
Yeah.
And they have a practice full of wellness patients and referrals that is self-sustaining. Their marketing budgets are 90% less than other people. Now, unicorns perhaps, right? But I know their numbers, right? Because they're all using our system. And I bring myself to lightly applaud, Brian, just lightly applaud. And I made eye contact once with one of them, and we're just kind of nodding our heads like, this is not an amazing exercise that's happening right now. The person being celebrated is not the definition of success.
Right.
Because,
well, I feel like it's more towards like burning the engines out of the owner and the practice itself, because process that many new patients and you're not keeping them. So there's no
Right.
growth. It's just there's a hole in the bucket.
We actually started calling it a leaky bucket after one of the coaching groups because it was such an apropos or appropriate descriptor for it. Because you get 50 new patients in, we're the same way. We have attrition, right?
Yeah.
And we have to concern ourselves with it. We have to concern ourselves with the experience of our clients, and we do, right? So if you're talking about the measurable, right? Production is one thing, quality is another, right? Quality is what's your retention rate, right? Because production is maybe how many new patients you got through the door. Quality is how many you kept.
Love it. Awesome. All right. So with process, we've got repeatability, transferability, scalability, measurability. So the next overarching theme that an organization needs for success is technology.
So this is one that's in my wheelhouse, maybe more than any other right off the bat, right? When I started here, because I wanted to get technology for this, technology for that, and I started putting it in, and I went too far.
Over technologied?
I did, as a matter of fact, because it turns out that was my comfort level. That was what worked for me. When you're putting these three things together, people, process, and technology, right? The client experience reigns supreme, right? So every time you're putting a person in place, every time you're putting a process in place, that client experience, which is a quality measure for sure, right, has to be the reason why you're doing something. How is this going to make the life easier for the client? How is this going to make the life easier for a team member? Unless you're asking and coming up with good answers for those questions, you don't use technology. If you are, you can create a lot of leverage and you can help your teammates and your clients have a much better experience. I'll give you some examples of that, right? Let's talk internally before we talk about maybe client facing. You need a way to make sure that a client experience is communicated internally from stage to stage. You need a way to make sure that you're capturing production numbers, right? Internally, right? So that a manager knows what a team member or a team is doing. It's harder than you think to find the right tech that goes out there. So again, unless you have what your goals are written down when you're going to look for the tech, you're going to be shooting from the hip. And I've seen this happen too often where people even come to select Genesis as an EHR and we're telling them no. And people are very frustrated with us, Brian. They're like, what do you mean? I think this is a good price. I think this is a great technology. No, you're going to be a terrible client. You have no idea what you want.
Right.
And they become frustrated because we still make them go through our process of figuring out what it is that they're looking for.
So their goals.
And some of them at the end of that say, absolutely, this is it. And some of them at the end of it, no, you're not a fit. I run a gym, I run a salon, I run everything else, and it can't all be shoehorned into this one software package, but they came just shooting from the hip, hoping they'll see what it is. They didn't create what their needs were written down and how it would affect their client experience. So
we as a technology organization, we're helping them pause, but applicable to those listening and looking to leverage their business with technology, first figure out what true needs and goals are, and then tie in that technology, whether it's creating more revenue or creating more efficiencies or better compliance.
Well, I'll take it to just another level there. We use a software package for our meetings. We used to have our meetings, an agenda put onto either a Google spreadsheet or a Google Doc. People had access to it, they could add to it, and our meetings were turned into this revolving discussion around multiple priorities. It was inefficient. We didn't get to choose the top priority, and we didn't have a way of saving ourselves from rabbit hole conversations where we saw something shiny and we went down the rabbit hole to go chase it. And now all of a sudden 3 months have gone by and we
missed the most important topics. Yeah.
So we actually read a book, we subscribed to a software and said, all right, each quarter we're going to make one or two, tops 3 goals. And then every single meeting, we're going to put issues on this software package that say, here's what we're going to talk about. And anybody on the meeting gets to ask, what does this have to do with our top 1 or 2 goals? And if the answer is nothing, there's this calm realization, Brian, that we're making a mistake, right? We're spending our time and energy on something that doesn't help us. And technology helped us get there because we weren't able to organize ourselves. Technology was able to help us better leverage our time to accomplish more. And since then, our growth rates increased. Our employee retention rate has also increased because we're wasting a lot less time.
Well, and I have to give a testament for my own experience. You know, I'm pretty new with Genesis and involved with this. The book is Traction, and it's a must read for business owners and entrepreneurs. Their system's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. We're actually going to have one of their people on Genesis Nation, so make sure you you definitely log in and listen to that one as well. It's just packed full of great information on how to run your organization. But you know, I've seen it myself because I tend to use comedy and distraction to make myself feel good about myself.
I've never used that as a mechanism, so
I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. You don't use it, but you've recognized it in me, and I'm like, man, this doesn't work in these meetings because we're on point. I get my time to speak, I vote, I move on, and I contribute or I don't. That's it. So very powerful.
And that's something we're talking about internally, right? We pay for that technology because when we have team members on board, we don't want to spend our time, right, for that team talking about the least important thing. If their goal is to figure out how to get clients through an onboarding process in 20% less time, right, that's going to require some real focus, right? And this technology helped us, right, by creating processes that were held accountable by technology. We leveraged that technology so I didn't have to hire somebody to like hit me in the head saying, you're no longer talking about the relevant item, right?
Well, so, it does require some discipline of the person running that meeting. We can get more into that, but we are running a little short on time, and I still have a couple things I want to chat about. But I would love to do just a whole section on meetings.
Absolutely, we could do that. But then we move from internal technology, right, where you still have to map out what your needs are, you know, for the business, right? The same way, right? What problems are we having? Where do we see opportunities for improvement, right? And what sort of technology exists out there? I know this may sound really weird. I don't ever really recommend, you know, certain social media platforms, but I belong to a couple of chat groups within LinkedIn, and I go out there. And by the way, this is how I was hired here 15 years ago, was through one of these chat groups on LinkedIn where somebody asked, well, how do you pay your people? And I responded, you know, what I thought, and one of the partners in the company told me I was not very smart. And then I told him why he wasn't very smart, and we had lunch, and we ended up.
And the rest is history. 15 years later.
Yeah, 15 years later, I still work with him. But you go out there and you see what exists because sometimes you don't know, right? And that's one of the benefits of social media platforms. I've gone out there and said, here's a problem I'm having. How are you managing this, right? And it's been really, really helpful because I've gotten some really good pointers on how we can do things. Because when you're talking about internal versus your client-facing stuff, there are some real great tools out there for marketing. There are some real great tools out there for education. There's some real great tools out there for, you can fill in the blank. It's 2023, Brian. There's pretty much good tools out there for everything. But unless you know exactly what you're looking for, you're shooting in the dark. So I would bet you dollars to donuts, most people out there do not have their exact process written down. And if you do that, the amount of power and clarity that you're going to generate, because you'll be able to know exactly what you're looking for, will change overnight. So
get your entire experience down first so that you can help yourself find the right people, develop the right processes, choose the right technology. So
one example of that, I know you said we have to move on. We brought on a technology platform to help us, you know, train clients, create training materials and walk them through and it wasn't a good fit. And we shot from the hip on it, as opposed to knowing exactly what we wanted. And we since have changed that, and we've come up with a very good way of vetting whether or not we're going to bring on business partners that are going to help us do that. Now, the other part about this is Genesis is a technology company, and we don't do everything for everyone. So we also have to figure out, what do our clients need? Because we look at their clients,
Neat.
right? So we have our clients, and their clients are patients.
Mhm.
So we look at their spectrum of needs, and we try to apply technology leverage to that as well. So you can even sometimes think, derivatively and go 2 layers deep when
You
thinking about.
mentioned, because you mentioned partners, and that's what I wanted to talk about. And I like the term success partners.
Sure, I like it too.
Do you mean like in some of the things, for example, with Genesis, we integrate with Sked, which is like a texting and calling platform.
Right.
Is that what you're referring to?
Absolutely. So if you're looking at your specific client needs, right, and you're mapping out where people, process, and technology are going to be applied, right, you have to also look at that return on investment, right? Like, for instance, if you're not going to use, I'll use Sked, but we have some other great success partners in that space, Brian, where getting automated reminders, online scheduling, other things like that are really important.
Yeah.
You have to measure, how much time does it take my people to do that? How many missed opportunities or opportunity costs existed that were missed? Meaning, we don't answer phones after this time or before this time, right? And most call systems allow you to see how many calls you missed, right? Well, how many opportunity costs am I missing if I partner with a call center or get Sked? Because somebody can go online and schedule whenever they want to, or they can get reminders when they want to. How much time, energy, and effort would be spent by a person as opposed to having technology there? And then you can work out the return on investment dollars that exist.
Love it. And I know we're kind of coming towards the end here, and there's a lot more for us to unpack. That there's 2 more things, and I want to squeeze these in. One is leadership, and the last piece is firing yourself.
Yeah. I'll start with the last one for 10 seconds, right? Okay. If you're doing this right, firing yourself doesn't mean you absolutely have to fire yourself, Brian. It means that you can remove yourself, and this will still work. It doesn't mean it'll grow and automatically turn into a 10x business in 3 years, but you can pull yourself out of being the engine on the day-to-day process. Yes. Of it all.
And go away for a month.
You have to be able to, that's the litmus test, right? A successful business, right? Otherwise, you just created yourself a job.
Yeah. Sole proprietorship. Yep.
Yep. So everything we're doing is about putting that in place. It doesn't mean that you don't check in. It doesn't mean that accountability goes away, right? Your job is to set an example. And I always like to think of any business as a reverse pyramid, right? The person at the top is not at the top. They're at the bottom. They're in the service industry. Their job is to serve those who serve underneath them. So if you think of it any other way, then people are most of the time going to try hiding things from you as opposed to bringing things to you. And there's a big difference there, because if you're leading by example, meaning that you're embracing the core values and setting the culture and creating clarity, you're going to create people that are going to bring you problems. If you delegate appropriately, right, but then hold people accountable by verifying, you're going to create a culture of expectation that is going to be perpetuated down the line. Because when we say what we do and we do what we say, people grow accustomed to that success and they want more of it.
Yeah.
And that's the magic formula for creating a business, is you actually create that fire and passion that burns when you're not there. Because the people you brought on have mastered the skills, like being good at things. They have purpose. You've given the autonomy, and you've led by example where you embody all of that, so you actually can step away.
Awesome. I'm gonna give us a period right there, because that was amazing. I definitely want more of this, man, because I just appreciate the way you do business, and with integrity and consciousness and empathy. So it's a joy and honor to have learned from you, and now to be working next to you. So thank you, my friend. And Genesis Nation, if you like this one, please share it. Take your notes, give us some feedback if you want more of this stuff, because this stuff just jazzes me. I could talk about this all day long. I love what I've learned from you, and continue to learn and work together. And as we, create and grow. So thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Love being here. Thank you so much, Brian.
All right.